Hello, hello, and welcome back to the 5 Foot Strong podcast, a podcast where we talk about strength in all its forms: physical, mental, emotional, and everything in between. I'm your host, Jessica Gerlock, and this season we're leaning into honest conversations, as I've said in the past episode. The kind that remind us that strength doesn't always look like pushing harder. Sometimes it looks like pausing, reflecting, and allowing ourselves to feel. Today's episode is a very important one. I'm honored to be joined by Lynda Fishman, author of Repairing Rainbows and inspirational speaker. Lynda shares her personal story that explores grief, loss, healing, and the resilience required it really takes to rebuild your life after a tragedy. Lynda's story is one of unimaginable heartbreak, but also profound courage, self discovery, and quite the strength it takes to keep going when life doesn't always look like you thought it would. This episode is for anyone who has experienced grief, tragedy, or moments where we've had to redefine what strength really means. So let's get into it all, and let's welcome Lynda Fishman to the 5 Foot Strong podcast. Hi, Lynda. How you doing?
Hi, Jess. Thanks for inviting me.
Thank you so much for coming. So I'm going to start off by asking you the question that I ask all the guests is what does being strong mean to you?
That's a great question. And I think being strong for me means that I don't need to always feel like I'm holding it together, and I don't need to pretend that I'm okay. It's the willingness to feel that loss, to feel that hurt, and still at the same time choose to live life as fully as possible. So learning that those two choices can coexist.
For sure.
And it's also for me staying soft and bendable in a very hard world sometimes,
I get
in
it.
a very tough world.
Mhm.
I often say that it's like bamboo. Bamboo is very bendable and can withstand a lot of wind and all the elements that try to knock it over, and yet it stands straight again. And I think the most important thing is for us to remember that we have to continue to trust and love and show up for life, even when we feel so broken.
That strength right there. 100% resilience. And, that I really believe that your story is shows resilience. So, can you share with our listeners a little bit of your journey?
Yes. When I was 13, many decades ago, in 1970, my mother and two younger sisters were killed in a plane crash. So, as a 13-year-old, I was left with a before and after mentality. Before the plane crash, what life was like, and then after, where everything changed. And that day, that tragedy, aside from splitting my life into a before and after, it also planted incredible seeds for me for everything that I would choose in my life since then, which was focusing on living life, trying to rebuild what was taken away from me in whatever way I possibly could as a 13-year-old, and just becoming softer in a world where I had seen such hardness and such a fractured life.
Yeah, that day changed everything for you.
And remember, in the 1970s and even, 80s and possibly even the 90s, people did not know how to talk about tragedy or loss or grief.
Mhm.
So they didn't. They
Right.
just didn't talk about it. They thought that if they don't mention it, somehow the people who are faced with this unimaginable situation would learn how to get on with their lives and move forward and get better and improve and it would just unhappen. But we now know that loss never unhappens,
Yeah.
and that talking about it and keeping that conversation open is actually way more important.
Well, that's what I love about this podcast is I believe our stories can help others. And I believe in all of that. And, this podcast is basically mental health based. And I like to talk about mental health a lot. And so, how did it affect the grieving process? Like, how did it affect your mental health and maybe other parts that people don't always talk about?
Well, that's an interesting question because it's your mental health and your emotional health
Yeah.
are definitely impacted by any loss or
Yeah.
tragedy. And when we talk about loss, let's be clear, we're not always talking about death.
Right.
Loss in any situation where you are losing something that you had and you miss it and you are in pain is a loss.
For sure.
The physical impact is something that people don't really understand. And that is that you are literally exhausted when you are trying to deal with a loss and when you are grieving.
Yeah.
It sucks all your energy out because you are focused so much on trying to get your footing again and trying to feel somewhat in control of something that you're otherwise so out of control with. And it's completely exhausting. And I think that's something that anyone who is grieving any loss
Yeah.
will say they have no idea how completely exhausting it is. In terms of emotional or mentally, that really depends on the choices that you make.
Yeah.
For me, I chose to remain soft and more empathetic and caring and tuned into other people way more than I ever had been. And I also feel that anytime you go through any kind of terrible loss, it makes you more compassionate to others who have gone through loss because you'll often say to yourself, I had no idea how hard it
Yeah.
would be for that person until I myself went through something terrible. So just being more compassionate is a choice that often people will make when they are going through any kind of loss or grieving any loss.
Y- You know, go for it. Continue.
No,
Sorry.
no, that's it. Yeah,
No, I really think that grieving anything, whether it be, a loss of, a family member or a loss of a relationship or any kind of relationship, I think the way we deal with it is really important to how we move forward. So, but what kind of coping tools have really helped you survive these years? Because I'm sure every day still is you're still being impacted.
absolutely. But let me be very clear that in the 1970s, the expectation
Yeah,
was that within about a year, we would be over it and we would be fine.
right.
And that was very clearly the message
Hmm.
that both my dad and I received back then,
Right.
which is completely unrealistic. And obviously, it's a way of stopping you from ever really addressing your grief or talking about it or really feeling the feelings you need to feel in order to feel like you have somehow gone through the grieving process. So that had to be put on the back burner.
Yeah.
And the way I did that was I never talked about the loss.
Okay.
I couldn't because I didn't want other people to be upset.
Okay.
And other people wouldn't talk about my mother or sisters because they thought they might stir up some sadness in me, as if somehow I had forgotten about this horrific hole in my heart.
Right.
So we just all understood that we weren't going to talk about it. So
Yeah.
what I did to cope was I created my own little rituals.
Hmm.
So I found that cleaning or organizing, doing anything that felt like I had some control gave me a feeling of some control in my life.
Hmm.
So I'm sure I had the absolute cleanest house in the neighborhood.
Yeah.
But that for me that made me feel like I had control.
Yeah.
And having a routine, knowing that I had something that I was able to hold the reins on. I kept a journal,
Yep.
and that journal came in very handy when I wrote my book almost 40 years later
Yeah.
because I was able to read my entries, which was so raw and personal and just between me and my journal.
Yep.
but those daily entries really helped me vent
Hmm.
in some way. And mostly, I think saying to myself, one day at a time, sometimes 1 hour at a time. Just get through the next short little bit of time. You don't have to have this whole thing figured out right now.
Yeah.
Just take it one step at a time. And I said that to myself, and I'm grateful that I had that much insight as a
Hmm.
young teenager, because there were times where it felt like it would be easier to give up on life. But I chose never to give up and to just say, okay, I've got this one step at a time. I don't need to climb the whole mountain.
Yeah, and that was a choice and the right choice that you made. Like, but no one's no, there's no right or wrong to how people grieve. But when did you start talking about it? Because you were told to push it away. When did you start talking about it?
I realized as I was an adult and started my own family that I had never really gone through the grieving process that I needed to go through. And because I was hypersensitive to uncertainty, anytime something related to me or my family felt uncertain, I would plummet back to that state of fear and
Mhm.
worry. And I thought, I really need to talk about this. I really need to go through this grieving process. And so it took a long time, but I started writing Repairing Rainbows
Mhm.
almost 40 years after the plane crash.
Okay.
And once I started writing, I
Yeah.
couldn't stop for literally a year. All I did was write. I
Yeah.
really escaped this world
Mhm.
and went back to the 1970s and rewrote the whole story that I had been writing in my head for years and years and years. And for me, that was when I realized that I'm actually now doing the grief work that I've never done.
Yeah, you had to tackle it head on and really that was your strength, I guess, It was, I'm sure, cathartic. What does your title of your book, Repairing Rainbows, mean?
Well, it's interesting. I came up with the title because for me, a rainbow is something beautiful that comes after a storm.
Yeah,
And so, as I said, my life was before 1970 and after 1970.
yeah,
And before 1970, I felt like life was filled with rainbows, beautiful, perfect rainbows. I had a wonderful childhood, an amazing family. I felt like everything was just so perfect, like
hmm,
a rainbow. And then, of course, on July 5th, 1970, that rainbow was completely shattered and fractured. And I felt like I needed to repair it. But just like when you repair a broken plate, you will always have all of the broken pieces quite visible, but you can glue it all back together and repair it and use the plate, but it will never be the same. And I understood that my life would never be the same again, having gone through this horrible loss. But at the same time, I could still repair that rainbow as much as I can and get the color back in my life.
that's
Because
beautiful.
anyone who's going through any kind of loss will talk about how dark life feels, that no matter where you look, you see darkness, you feel like you're just trapped in darkness. And I wanted to see colors again.
I love that. That's such a beautiful thing. And the whole idea of this podcast is strength, and you found the beauty, not the beauty, but you were able to deal with it in a strong way. Now you're helping others uh, grieve. So if a listener is struggling after any kind of loss, what's one small mental or physical practice that you can help them keep going?
Well, I think the way we talk to ourselves and what we say to ourselves is so critical. Let's face it, we speak to ourselves more than we speak to anybody. And we need to learn how to have a dialogue with ourselves that is motivating and encouraging. So, going to bed at night and just instilling that motivation, that reason to keep going, that reminder that life can be tackled one step at a time. You don't need to have the whole thing figured out. We never know what the whole thing is going to be. So be okay with having small baby steps to move forward and to make choices with the ultimate message being, I'm never going to give up. I'm going to keep fighting as hard as this is. I'm going to keep climbing this mountain as hard as it is because I don't want to go back down. I want to go up and feel really good about every step that you take. And just also understanding that when you go through any kind of loss, that pain and that sadness can exist at the same time as happiness and joy. They can coexist, and you don't have to feel guilty about wanting to live again. You don't have to feel guilty about smiling and being happy when you've just gone through something horrible, because those emotions can exist at the same time, and you have to be okay with that. And a lot of people don't know that you can have permission to feel both of them at the same time.
And I think that's important for people to realize. I think that's a really important thing. So, as we wrap up today's episode, I just want to thank you again for coming on and sharing your story and how you're, helping people move on from loss. I think it's really important. Conversations like this remind me that strength isn't about having all the answers or moving on before we're ready. It's about allowing ourselves to heal, to feel, and to keep showing up even when it's hard. And that's exactly what you showed. So thank you so much.
Thanks, Jess.
I appreciate it. Thank you for trusting me again, for sharing your story. And if anyone wants to find you on social media or get your book, where's it available? Amazon?
Yes, they can
Perfect.
just Google repairing rainbows.
Perfect. Please, everyone, read this book. It's very inspirational. I've known Lynda for a long time, and I'm inspired by how resilient you are. So thank you again.
All right. Thanks, Jess.
Have a good one.
You too.